oh, sorry, the meeting summary from last month. Somebody switched the order on me.
I move we approve the meeting summary.
Right? We
I'll
have-
second it.
Okay, moved by Edmund, seconded by Dale. Any comments, discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, who are the nays?
Abigail.
Abby and? And any abstentions?
This is Justine. I abstain. I was not there, so.
Okay, thank you. All right, motion passes. Item 3 on our agenda is a report from any public comments we might have received. And as of this time, we've not received any. So we'll move on to item number 4, RTA Next Development Update. And this will be kind of a group presentation because several of the CAC members and jurisdictional members of the TMC have met a couple of times now and will be meeting again this week. Primarily to this point, working on ideas for the CAC to consider with regard to the named projects, the named corridor projects, and how to prioritize those, and perhaps how to help us get to the point where we can reduce our total proposed amount from the 1.4 billion that it is today down to the 1.1 that the board has requested of us. So let's see, who wants to jump in with a summary of that?
Mr. Chair, good afternoon, everyone. This is Kaki. So the ad hoc TMC working group has met for the last 2 weeks. And as Tom explained, they've been reviewing the named project list. And I was not at the last meeting, and I will hand it over to Jeanette to give us more detail. But and also Carmine from Pima County is also here. He is one of the ad hoc working group members. By the way, the ad hoc working group that I'm referring to consists of 1 jurisdictional member from each of the 9 jurisdictions, and then 6 CAC members. And this group has been working together for the last 2 weeks to try and get the list refined. So there has been a lot of discussion on the list of the 37 is where they ended up starting. And they reviewed and asked us after the first meeting to categorize the projects in terms of the spreadsheet that you have in your packet, and that those of you that are in the room that's here. It was categorized into 4 different areas: capacity enhancement, operational, new roadway, and modernization. The TMC then prioritized those 4 groups, and they are in the order that you see. So capacity enhancement was the #1 priority of category for this, and then modernization was the 4th. After that, the working group reviewed each of the projects, gave us the feedback that they would like to see a priority list. They gave us their priorities of projects within each of those groups. And as you can see on the column that says priority, that's the number of priority for each of the projects under that category. So for example, under capacity enhancements, the Oro Valley, Sahuarita, and Pima County projects of Lambert Lane, Pima Mine, and Valencia Road are their #1 projects, for example. And then if you go down under that category, the Orange Grove project for Pima County would be their #4 priority. So that's how they're all listed within each. This helped the working group to start looking and refining the list to determine what could be removed. One thing to please note is that the city of Tucson, since they do have so many projects, they are still working on their refinements. So the projects that you see in the kind of the gold color, not the bright yellow, but the gold color, those are projects that have been suggested by the working group to maybe reconsider. The city,
Okay, I mentioned that the way that you see these projects separated now represents a proposed step in the prioritization process that would take the top 7 priority projects of each of the jurisdictions. Actually, I think only Tucson has as many as 7, although Pima County
has 7.
Pima County also has 7. So we take those top 7 and then anything that fell below that. So that would be numbers 8 through 16 of the city's the city's modernization project. Sorry. This is what the latest proposal was from a TMC member. There was also another proposal to take the top two priorities within each of the categories, and then divide the city projects into thirds essentially, and take the top 2/3 of those projects. In both cases, you come up with a total of about $1.1 billion, which is our target.
yeah, thank you, Tom. And also to add to that, there is a high, medium, and low column, and those projects are put, anything that was 1 to 5 was considered high, anything 6 to 10 priority was medium, and anything below that was low. Just to kind of give you an idea of where things fell. So at last week's meeting, I'll let Jeanette kind of go over the details of the discussion that then followed up after the first meeting. Jeanette?
Sure, thank you, Paki. And I did pull up the spreadsheet that was in your packet, and it's on the screen. And for those on the Zoom meeting, you can see it. So as Paki mentioned, the task was to take that $1.4 billion price tag on the named project list and bring that down to the 1.12 billion that the RTA board had tasked the group to do. So after 2 weeks of meetings, there was some reprioritization and reexamination of the projects, and the motion was made to take the yellow projects that you see right here, subtract those, as well as the one project up here, the South Country Club Road project. So in doing so, the committee was able to get under that 1.12 billion. In fact, they got down even further by $75 million. So they were able to cut it down. And then part of the motion was to take that remaining balance and have the city of Tucson take a look at some of their other projects that were cut and see if they wanted to reprioritize their projects to add that number back in. So we're still at the point now where we're waiting for the city to come back and say which projects are their last priorities here and how they want to spend that 75 million. But other than that, you can see the projects that made it and that they were able to get past that 1.12 billion.
And also, Mr. Chair, to add, if you look on the column, it's in green that says remove RTA amounts. The removed total is there. I think on the screen it's red. Is that correct?
Yep, it's
Yeah.
red.
It's 364 million. That's the amount that has been being suggested to be removed if these all the projects in gold are removed.
Yeah, just a reminder, we were at 296 million as the target for removal. So that difference is the $75 million that essentially the proposal or the suggestion at this time from the TMC and CAC working group would leave that 75 million specifically for City of Tucson modernization projects. And as Paki said, the city is taking a look at its priorities and its scopes for those projects to see how much and how much further down that list they could get with that additional money. Question, Edmund?
Yes, great. All the work they did here. For us to stay in lockstep with the TMC, so we can continue to move forward, are they looking for our approval of this, what they have here, or do they want us to wait until we have heard back from the city on the 75 million that they're still looking to spend?
Well, I think at this point, the working group is interested in any input that the CAC has that our CAC members can take forward, and that our TMC reps, including Carmine, who's sitting at the table today, can take back to that working group. The process after the working group comes up with a recommendation is that recommendation would go to the full technical management committee, and presumably, if accepted, then forwarded to us for our consideration. Do you want to add anything, Carmine?
No, not at this time.
And I mean, they're gonna be meeting on Wednesday, that working group.
Yeah, we'll be working on Wednesday. Again, we will get more information from the city by that time. But it's worth opening the floor to reactions from the full CAC about what you see here. And we have a couple of questions online and a couple here in the room. And let's start with Moss.
Thank you, Tom. So just to clarify, this would be presuming that the name projects remain specific to roadways rather than the kind of other proposal that I hope we talk about today, that would distribute name projects and the funds across categories. Is that correct?
Yeah, according to the RTA methods and means, the projects that are named in accordance with the ordinance all are amalgamated into that named project category. And so if there are named projects such as the city's modernization projects, which could be considered as heavy maintenance or capital maintenance, I think is the term, or that may be safety projects or might be specific to safety, as in pedestrian safety or bike safety. Those are all named projects. In order to name any of the categoricals, we would take that and move them into the named projects, but we can't have named projects within the categoricals. Doesn't mean that there aren't some that are known. It's just that none of them have risen to the point that they made the 108 project list that the jurisdictions provided back 2 years ago, I guess.
Couple points of clarification on that, Tom. Thank you. I think that, so, I mean, the way this has been presented to us, you know, for I guess years now, is that the name projects, the only reason that they've been under the roadway project just because people under that category of roadways, just because they have been roadway projects, which makes sense. And that's my understanding of why the high capacity transit projects aren't appearing on this list, or at least the BRT. I've been missing that. And I think it was, as I recall, the conversation had to do with, well, these aren't roadway projects, so they shouldn't be into the name roadway project category. So I think there's a lot of clarity around there. And then I've repeatedly brought this up, so I'm not sure why this keeps getting glanced over, about Oro Valley and Pima County both coming to us back in, I think it was like November, and saying how there was a lot of confusion around when the request for projects was sent out, and people thought that it was only for roadways. And I'm happy to read the verbatim quote that I took from Paul Kiesler and Catherine Skinner that said that, if that's helpful to jog people's memories. So again, I think the reason we have a list that's dominated by roadway projects is because that's what some jurisdictions, out of whatever confusion existed, thought that's what was being asked, and it was never remedied. There was never a follow-up, or that never was corrected. And then
in
the
reality,
separation.
Mas, I'm sorry to interrupt. In reality, the modernization projects and the capacity enhancements are both about the same size. I think there's a few more projects of modernization, but the value of them at 578 million versus the 482 million of the capacity enhancements are approximately the same. So in general, the reason that we asked to categorize these named projects is for that very reason, so that we could understand what types of projects we had recommended. We have 36 or 37 projects, and we wanted to know, have we done anything to attack the guidelines and priorities that we had as a committee going into it. And this is a way to look at how we did at that, and I think fairly well.
So, I mean, I guess I just see these as being subcategories of the roadway project, of the roadway element. And that makes sense to me, and that's fine, because I don't really see how this connects to like modernization of a roadway corridor, that's really fixated still on kind of that roadway project component, isn't necessarily specific to pedestrian. If there's like a specific pedestrian corridor project that was happening, that would make sense for it to be a named project that would come out of that. And so that's what the distinction that I think that we've been trying to make over the last couple meetings. And so I guess that's where, to me, well, first off, this is like all very brand new and not what I recall being discussed at the last CAC meeting. And I'm fine with this organization as long as it's seen as a sub elements within the named, or within the roadway element, which makes sense, and we can repeat that across other elements. But I think there's a lot of conversation that we're still trying to have as a CAC about how this all shakes out. And I just want to make very clear that a modernization project, I don't think falls into enough categories doesn't cover, all the categories that we're looking at across.
Well, in general, the modernization projects don't move the curbs unless it's to add bike lanes. They're typically resurfacing the roadways in many cases, or in some cases, reducing the number of lanes, and in other cases, restriping or making changes to the signals, adding the amenities that are missing, whether it be related to bikes or peds, and technology, adding pedestrian signals and the like. So those are a very different kind of project. And as I said, many of them could technically be considered capital maintenance. At least that's what we've been told, or certainly large amounts of their scopes could be. Okay.
Well, I guess I don't see the difference between like expanding a curve versus decreasing a curve. It's like, it sounds like we're really trying to thread a really interesting line there. And I think the point is like, what is the focus of the project? And the project is on vehicular movement and that roadway infrastructure for vehicles, then that belongs in the roadway project. And maybe we need to have a conversation about those definitions, because the way I've read some of these projects, that doesn't mean, like, those aren't pedestrian projects, right? These are roadway projects that are being put forward. And I think that shouldn't get obfuscated to try to make it seem as though it's a pedestrian or a public transit or
and we'll take your considerations forward on Wednesday when we talk to the working group and discuss it with them as well. Go ahead.
With the
Ed.
mustard yellow projects that are being removed by the TMC, with the city of Tucson still needing to come up with $75 million of projects, are we safe to say that these are the projects they're going to pull from? When they come up with their
Yeah.
75 million, this
They
is
will-
basically their bucket?
They will come from those. So as you can see, if you took as an example, priorities or numbers 9 and 10, which are 75 million plus, that would basically add 2 more projects to that list.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, Kevin is next.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Just a quick question. I guess I'm concerned, or I'm curious to know what the status of the cost estimating is. Because I guess I'm worried that if these are still based off of 2019, 2018 numbers, that we're going to have to cut significantly more after this. So I was just kind of curious what the status of cost estimating is.
Yeah, the project lists have been looked at, or the estimates have been looked at by the individual jurisdictions and updated in many cases, if not all. But the work that's ongoing is under Rick Ellis's control at this point, and he's at the podium, so I'll let him correct all my mistakes.
No, actually, Tom, you were about 95% of the way there. And the only thing I can add to it is it's still ongoing. We're still meeting with the jurisdictions to get the exact layout, configurations. It's an effort that's still in progress. So we don't have any additional information that we'll be able to plug into it. Kevin, to your key point on there, I think that's a potential, and that always has been.
Thanks. Hey, Rick, before you step down, could you remind us how, because I think you're the author of these categories of named projects. Could you remind us about what each of them represents? I know there's a blurb there that talks about them, but did I get it totally wrong in, I guess, the way I was trying to explain it?
No, you're not. And I think the only thing we add, there's a little gray fringe. So some of these, they're not biblical definitions, meaning they fit in the box perfectly good. Some can make, and we try to make a best fit determination, much like what Tom alluded to. So projects that are generally maintaining, to pick on modernization, we called it functionalization in the beginning. So that kind of connects dots as we've gone along on that. It's meant to convey that the basic lane configuration and throughput capacity is remaining consistent. If you have a 4 or 5 lane section, you'll probably have the same type of configuration, but the extra amenities to ensure it's fully functional, meaning the bike facilities, the pedestrian facilities, the adequate crossings out there, transit amenities, maybe some medians in there that would help provide additional safety in the form of access management. Those would be components brought to the table. The exact specific scope elements do change from project to project. So in some cases, curbing lines might be adjusted. In other cases, that may not be as necessary. So we're going through those evaluations on those individual case-by-case basis. So overall, the capacity category was meant to show that we're increasing the number of throughput lanes. And throughput is the whole corridor, not the intersections. So it's going from a 2-lane, 3-lane to a 4, 5, or 6-lane configuration on that. I'm trying to remember how it goes next. What is it? Operational is the next one. Operational. That's kind of a definition, meaning that you haven't got the full performance of the roadway corridor. There's impediments there. It can be in the form of drainage. It can be in the form of lack of all-weather crossings. It can be the form of railroad crossings that are hindering your movement, a lack of adequate turn lanes. So you may have pretty basic traffic carrying capabilities out there, but you have impediments that are affecting the overall optimization of that. You're not getting the maximized performance out of that roadway. So it's missing some of those key features, turning features, and at the same time, missing those other multimodal facilities and aspects as well. New cord.
Only a couple of projects slotted directly into that, but that's, I would assume, primarily because that was their prime focus. Some of those completion or operational improvements are probably being made in most of the other projects as well. Is that
That's, yeah, a lot of this does carry over. So you're looking at kind of the primary deficiencies. That's where I go back to, there's a little bit of gray area in some of these. You know, a project like the Cortero or Tangerine, where you have an at-grade railroad crossing that impedes your overall mobility, functional safety, that's a little bit more crystal clear. A two-lane roadway that's got turning maneuvers that slows down, impedes, interferes with safe, effective operations, it's a little bit different. And Tom's correct. Those type of situations are also encountered on modernization projects, on capacity projects, on new corridors. So there's deficiencies that are going to be across all four categories. What we're trying to do is highlight the predominant ones to allow a little bit of basic grouping on that to help aid the CAC on it. And then the new alignments, new corridors, that was fairly self-explanatory. It meant to, at the time we had all 108, we had a couple of projects that were brand new virgin corridor, nothing existed. As this has evolved, we have segments that are going to be on brand new roadway corridor. Plus the jurisdiction, if they had a better definition or if they felt it moved into a better category, we adjusted accordingly. Lastly, the modernization, as Tom's talked about, and hopefully address that. Tom, did that get to what you wanted? And is that the expansion that offered any additional?
That's what I wanted. I don't know if the rest of the committee wanted it or not, but we'll hear from them in a few minutes.
I was going to say, sorry if that rambled and babbled on, but
Fine.
Hopefully it struck that balance.
Yeah, Kevin, thanks for the question. I wonder, did you get the answer you wanted, or did you have anything else?
Did I hear a date when we're expecting the cost estimates?
Oh, you didn't.
No, you didn't. And I'm been reluctant to give one in any setting I've gone to, just simply because we're still fairly early on. We're going through the reviews right now with the jurisdictions of the actual configuration. I think I've shared with everybody that it's a 3D model simulation is what we're coming up with. And because we're still working to get that part identified and making sure that that effort, because that's the whole heart and soul of it. What is this roadway going to look like? Do we have that located properly, right configuration, right cross section? If that's not in its proper and appropriate form, the whole house of cards needs to be readjusted. So we're in the middle of that. We're having those discussions as we go on. We're well aware of the target timelines that have been established, and we're doing our best to try and meet that.
Sounds
All
like
right. Thank you.
simulations and or fly-throughs or the like might be a helpful tool, I guess, when you do go out to the public and show them what the plan is, you'd be able to show them, at least for these named projects, what they could expect.
We're expecting that we have that capability to it. So that's going to be a whole lot easier to interface with the public and tell them what it's going to look like. It's been a lot easier for all of us at the staff level, as opposed to looking at plan sheets and going, well, how does that look three-dimensionally? We get to see three-dimensionally. We get to see what it looks like from the ground level, profile, top view, everything else. So that has been a greatly added tool. We're still making sure it's still fundamentally brings the basics to the table too.
All right. Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it. Who's first? Ron.
Might have along the same lines as Kevin. In looking at this RTA working draft form that you gave us, I was expecting we were going to get some information on a more clarification on this. An example is, for example, the Portero Road interchange. We were carrying a $90 million cost estimate. Now on the new program, we're showing it as 100 million RTA funds and another 100 million from non-RTA sources. So has it gone from 90 million to 200 million?
Yep.
And if it has, where are these other sources of funds going to come from?
Well, the second 100 is from ADOT. The first 100 is proposed to be from RTA.
So Ron, to add to that, as this effort has gone along, TMC has requested that out of their member jurisdictions. POCI's been doing the same thing over the last several months, that as we built up to the effort that I'm working on, which is much more detailed, if the jurisdictions had updated information they could bring to the table, by all means, plug that in. It wasn't going to be 3 years ago you had X, tomorrow you'll have Y. If there's better information we can bring to feed the discussions, then the jurisdictions were encouraged to do that, and many of them did. So that's why you see that evolution is this was plug it the moment it becomes available and the jurisdiction provides it.
Good. Thanks. Bruce.
I don't care.
Sorry, we're coming down the line.
Well, I'll make mine real quick. That was my question, so I'm done.
All right.
Yeah,
Bruce.
I think I understand the logic and the rationale that's gone into this, and I think it's very defensible in going forward. However, just to clarify, at the last meeting we had, I think when City Manager Ortega was here, the suggestion was made that the TMC was going to look at perhaps a different approach, was to look primarily at intersection improvements and maybe limited lane improvements as a way of reducing these numbers. And my question is, did they consider that? Was that discarded as a rationale or an approach to reducing the cost of these projects?
I'll ask Carmine to weigh in.
So good question. I know that has generated a lot of conversation. That was a prior discussion and action by the Technical Management Committee. And so each jurisdiction was asked to go look at their list of projects and see if those opportunities were present and to indicate such. So all of the jurisdictions came back and said that those types of scope changes to move away from the corridor project and do intersection projects instead were not possible under each of them, but for the city of Tucson, who is still going through their review of all of their projects.
So just as a follow-up question, and I know this is probably more complex and not so simplistic, but if we look at the projects, particularly the capacity enhancement ones, are we looking at primarily a full road build out under those proposals and that funding for those projects?
You mean like an ultimate cross section, or are you just talking about an incremental?
No, I'm talking about it. I mean, would we get the full cross section improvements as part of those projects?
I'm sorry, can I ask for clarification? I don't know what you mean by cross-section of improvements. Can you?
Right, so I guess what I'm asking is, and let me just, as an example, if we take, say, Lambert Lane, or I don't know, what Thornydale Road or whatever, and the funds that are projected for those and those capacity enhancement, would we end up with a fully completed roadway with all the constituent elements of that roadway under that project, which would include bike lanes and sidewalks and lighting and all those different kinds of things?
Yes, we would, but I'll let Rick.
So the reason I'm going to kind of answer it this way. So Abby, to your question, the cross section is what we look at. If we were to drop down in the road, look at it and see, okay, there's lane, median, bike lane, sidewalk, multi-use pathway, all that kind of stuff. So yes, we're looking at all those items and saying that the cost to provide all those features to make a fully functional key roadway as submitted, here's what it would look like, and here's all those aspects that would be included. Cross drainage, those are all things that have been conveyed to us by the jurisdictions and then have been endorsed by. And so companion with that will make sure that whatever those items and features and elements that are included in that cost, are they compassionate, commiserate and consistent with RTA boards, policies, codes, and requirements about what's eligible for reimbursement, or do we have a way of addressing those? So off the top of my head, I can't give you one that falls in that category, but we're making sure that all of it does include all those aspects. It's not a piecemeal approach, maybe, if that's a better answer.
Would that be the case for the operational and the modernization projects as well?
Yes, and to add to what Carmine stated, as of right this second, they've not come back and said we can scale back anything. I think that's correct with what you were saying too, Carmine, is that was the thinking that was asked of the jurisdictions, and I don't believe any of them, the city sell outstanding with their projects, but it's what's being requested, what's being needed to essentially fulfill the request from this group. Make sure it's a fully functional and not a limited or a partial or a piecemeal type of solution out there. Does that get to your question?
Yeah, thanks for that clarification.
Abby, you thought what he was talking about.
I am
cross section.
satisfied.
I was going to say, did that
You're good, thanks.
literally short of waving my arms around and going to, okay.
That was a great answer.
We do have two TMC members with us today. As I said, Carmine's here in the room. Terry Rosema from Marana is online. Terry, did you want to weigh in at all on the conversation we were having about the TMC's discussions?
I think you did an awesome job of covering it quite frankly, Tom. But I think, just to kind of summarize, there was a lot of discussion. I think it was positive discussion. I think that, one of the TMC members made a motion that generated a lot of discussion. And in the end, his motion got amended a time or two before we finally got to the final version of it, wherein, the first seven priorities of each jurisdiction, as you indicated, most jurisdictions have 2 or 3, with the exception of the county and the city. But all of those in the top 7 would be funded, and then there's 75 million left over. And the motion, I think, was to have the city evaluate the remainder of their projects, which I believe all of them were modernization projects in nature. And
All of the remaining ones are, yeah.
yeah,
Exception of.
and that but they would, and they still had some work to do, and I think that was alluded to and discussed a little bit earlier as well, that they were doing some work to evaluate each one of those projects to determine which ones they even wanted to move forward, and which ones would be the highest priorities for them. So I thought overall it ended in a good place, and I was real happy overall with the conversation.
Thanks, Terry. It did, Jeanette just reminded me that we kind of glossed over, failed to indicate that one of the projects was removed by the TMC, the jurisdictions that were involved in the South Country Club extension project that had been brought to us from TAA, and added kind of as a placeholder in our list. The decision was made that regionally it was an important project, could be supported by the full region, and that perhaps the best way to proceed with that would be through a grant, a federal grant process. And so I'm not sure, Carmine, who's taking the lead on that? Is that city, or would it be you and they, or PAG?
So when the discussion took place at the TMC, the suggestion was made that this be coordinated through the Transportation Planning Committee. So that was a recommendation made, and that the chair of that committee has reached out to staff here at PAG RTA, and will, coordinate with them on that. But, just to what Tom said, that project is identified as important regionally. We think it competes very well for federal grant dollars because of the improvements that ADOT is doing, and then the ability for all of the local jurisdictions to come together with Tucson International Airport and with other partners in the region that would be served and benefit from that to put forward a competitive grant. So we'll be working through our appointee on the Transportation Planning Committee, and I think others will do the same. So.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and the reason we got to 75 million was because that 36 million that was estimated for South Country Club was removed, and so combined with the 39 million that this exercise produced in under budget, left that 75 million that we keep talking about. Dale.
Just to everybody was just talking about whether all the City of Tucson projects are modernization. There is one non-modernization project, and it's the Drexel Bridge over the Santa Cruz River.
Yeah.
And obviously that bridge is needed for multimodal.
And of course, there will also be the high capacity transit project, assuming that we continue to bring that forward within the transit project list. That will be a named project. Okay, Karen.
Sorry, I think you may have answered this, but did you just say that the project 2540 is now off the RTA funding list?
Yes. Just had to check the number to make sure.
That's recommended, right?
Well, the TMC has said that they will not continue forward with it in whatever they recommend to us. Certainly, the CAC has, theoretically, I guess, the right to add it into our project list. As you recall, we've been hoping for some months now to get more of an explanation of the project. We've gotten some information, but perhaps haven't had really the opportunity, I guess, to debate that project and get into it in detail. So I guess I kind of look at it as just one less debate, I guess, that we would need to have as a committee if we go along with what the TMC is recommending. Yes, go ahead.
And this is Carmine, if I can just clarify on that. So there was a lot of conversation and this is the working group. So it's the TMC CAC working group that has met the last 2 weeks and has come to the point of forwarding this current recommendation. And there was a motion that, as described, says take up to the top 7 from each jurisdiction, remove the South Country Club project off there. There was a lot of discussion during the meeting and when the motion was made, and Terry Rosema alluded to this about whether that was the final list. And what the working group had asked is that this information be brought back to the working group at this coming meeting. So from that perspective, right, and there was some language used when the motion was made that we sort of close out the discussion on the named roadway project list. And that then was discussed and we landed at, this is what the recommendation is, and then bring back information. We had asked that staff bring back information that shows, okay, what's the geographic distribution of those projects that would be covered under the motion? And so see it on a map. What is the split of dollar allocation by jurisdiction? How do those projects lay out across the region in terms of, right, where population bases are? So that information will be brought back and discussed again by the working group. And I just wanted to note that in terms of responding to Chris's question about, is it final? It's as final as it could be at that point in time, with additional information coming back for discussion.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that clarification. That was great. Edmund and then Carolyn.
I made the original motion to add 2540, the South Country Club modernization, to this list originally. And I'm completely satisfied with what I've heard in regard to us going after federal dollars to improve that. And I love the fact that so many different jurisdictions and municipalities are getting involved, because that's a really important corridor for our airport, but completely satisfied that it's off this list and we're going after federal funds.
Very good. Carolyn.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think Carmine pretty much covered it, but and thank you, Edmund, because you did bring it up and we specifically wanted feedback from the TMC during that meeting. But I just wanted to remind you, Tom, that you continue to call it the TMC meeting, but it was a joint meeting. So we have some ownership and complicity in that too. And
You mean complicity?
whatever. Yeah. So just as we're going forward, because we did have input, the 6 of us and I guess it was 9 of them if everybody was there. And and then I assume that we go take it back to our larger committees when we're all done with our working group process. Anyway, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you for catching that. Bruce.
So I'm trying to understand procedurally where we're going. I guess my sense of this is that you're asking today for the sense of the CAC as to whether or not the ad hoc committee is headed in the right direction with this approach. And if that's what you're asking for, I would put that proposition in front of the CAC as a motion.
Is that a motion?
I'm sorry?
Is that a motion?
Yes.
Yes, that is
I will
a-
second that motion.
All right, thank you.
I'd like to provide a substitute motion that we hold on doing any type of action on this until we've had time to discuss the alternative plan and continue the discussion from our last meeting.
Yeah, Moss, I saw your hand up. We're in,
Yep, I'm offering a substitute motion, Tom. And if
that's
it's-
fine. I understand, but I would like to also then, when that's done, have you tell us what you were going to talk about before. But,
Okay.
Go ahead. So there's a substitute motion to
Second.
to do nothing. Is that right?
To hold until we've had a conversation about continue the conversation we've been building for the last couple of weeks with an alternative framework for this plan that's actually CAC driven. Thanks for seconding, Carolyn.
Okay. Is there discussion? Moss.
I just think that, I think there's a way to make a lot of this, if we had the opportunity to, I had hoped that we would be talking through some of the materials I sent and sent you and the chairs, Tom, that incorporated the feedback that other CAC members provided. I think Bruce and Arlen specifically, a different framework that was based on RMAP, Move Tucson, and PEMA documentation. And using that as a framework for the CAC to put forward rather than kind of like copy paste of RTA 1. At my perspective, it's a framework that is more up to date with what our region needs and ensuring that these scarce dollars are adequately allocated to all the different modes of transit and the needs. And I would be really looking forward to presenting it. Bruce, I had some exciting things on economic vitality and technology that I thought you would be excited about, including like fiber, where I've dug up an old PAG plan from the, I'm blanking on the economic subcommittee that it's like EVAC or something like that, that commissioned an entire plan about how to use RTA dollars and cited RTA dollars as an opportunity to expand our fiber network. And since it's within the roadway and how to coordinate some of those dollars. And so I really did spend a lot of time digging through regional plans and trying to think of how we could, bring together projects that were reflected in this. And I just hope that we have the opportunity to really consider that instead of kind of disappearing for a month and then coming back and taking action on something that we have really no ownership over.
Yeah, and it's a good point, Moss, besides the fact that this is an information item, and so we shouldn't be and won't be taking action on it. I'll hold these two competing, if you will, motions for our next item. But just for the rest of the committee's information, Moss made a proposal at our last meeting actually, and staff had not had a chance to look at it. They did and sent a memo to us all, kind of looking at that and giving us some feedback about RTA rules and regs, as well as what the board had asked for, et cetera. And then yesterday, Moss sent me a revised proposal. And what I would like to do, and I think we'll have time to talk about it a little bit, but what I don't want to do is launch into a full-blown discussion of it until we can get an update on that staff review of it, so that we have all the information we need when we do discuss it. my anticipation is that at our next meeting, and we'll have a conversation about our next and following meetings here in a little bit, but I would think that at our next meeting, that proposal with the staff review and all of us having an opportunity to spend some time with it so that we can all, put an intelligent conversation together would most likely happen at our next meeting. But we will still be talking about it today in the time that we have. Bruce?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to the motion. So I wasn't proposing that we were voting in favor of this or against it. What I would like to, my motion was designed to get the working group to the point that this particular approach could be put on the table in its fullest form. I think what Moss has done, as I understand it, is very creative and a different approach. And then I think we need to lay those two side by side and discuss them as a committee. So my motion was not to say the CAC embraces this at this point, but to let it get to its final conclusion so we can really see what it looks like and what all the details are.
Yeah, and at the very least, I would ask that the CAC members of the working group come to the meeting on Wednesday, prepared to pass on the conversations that we've had at our meeting today, including obvious support for the direction that the TMC CAC working group has gone to date, as well as the opposition view of an alternative framework that Moss presents. So I fully intend, and I'm sure that the TMC members who are here today, who also serve on that working group, will have the opportunity to talk to the members of the working group as well. So any other comments? Abby?
Just clarification again. Could you summarize your motion, Bruce, in like a sentence?
I'm suggesting.
Without run-ons.
Yeah, huh?
Not a run-on sentence.
Well, I'll speak the way I speak, all right? My motion was that we give back to the ad hoc working group that the sense that they should complete this approach to funding the named projects so that we can see it in its final form at our subsequent meeting. It has nothing to do with making a final decision about Moss's proposal and this proposal against each other, but I'd like to see this particular approach completed so that we can evaluate it and look at it in its final form. And that was the sense of my motion.
Bruce, thanks for that clarification. I think it's really helpful and I'm supportive of that. I'm wondering, would you maybe be interested in a friendly amendment that has that asks the working group to also take a pass at what named projects across the other elements in that alternative framework might look like too? And that could just be like getting some, asking jurisdictions to name from some of their plans or looking at our map or any kind of on the docket plans that they have to say like, well, what could we maybe list as a named project for economic vitality and technology, for example, just so that we have then all the options and we can really come to our upcoming meetings with all the information. And I could try to restate that if it wasn't clear, but just curious if you're open to that.
I think I mentioned earlier, Moss, that that was something that I would be talking to the working group about. That is the idea of your proposal, which names projects that have not been named, and that creates a significant amount of projects that to date have never been named. So that is a part of what I said before, that I would make sure the TMC CAC working group had as information as they do their work.
So, okay, sorry, I missed that, Tom. So you're saying that we will eventually end up with kind of two things. This, a similar document like this with the alternatives is what you're saying. We'll have both.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the committee, the working group will discuss that. I don't know
Okay. Well, that was
where that conversation will go. I don't know if the jurisdictions have such a list as you're talking about.
well, the appendix of our map does have a whole
I
reserve
doubt that
list.
they do, because I know they have some important projects and they've named those already, but it could be that some of the very minor projects, you know, ADA projects and others that they put out kind of with their smaller contracts may be known at this time. But we'll have to have that conversation with them to understand that.
So but Tom, my suggestion is that we ask folks to come with do the gameplay on it and see what it would look like, and ask people to think about what could be there, because it doesn't have to be a lot of projects. There could be, right, we see here there's a couple of projects that are just really expensive, and that's kind of, and they take up a lot of budget, right? And so maybe there are some big public transit projects that haven't been named yet. And I think, again, getting to see having it all laid out, like what is the high capacity transit, the BRT project, and some of those other ones, what does that look like with it coming out of the name bucket for the public transit category, having some specific things related to system maintenance and active transportation, and just getting a sense, like what would that look like, and having two spreadsheets that have similar information for the two different approaches. And that's my ask, is that the working group, in addition to Bruce's suggestion, also vet this other option.
Got it. Understand. Thanks. Okay.
So Bruce, are you open to that friendly amendment?
Oh, we're not gonna vote on those until we get into the next item. And then we will bring that back. But he's thinking about it. I see his.
If I can respond, again, I think I would ask Moss to withdraw her substitute motion. I think we're confusing the two matters. I want to see this plan get over to the committee and completed, the ad hoc committee, so that we can see it in its final form. I fully support Moss having an opportunity to present her approach and her idea to this committee, but I think they're two separate items that need to be viewed in the work process in that way. So.
Okay. All right. Let's. Oh, sorry, Edmund. Go ahead.
And we're in number 4, right? RTA next development update. This is just informational. We're like beating up motions forever, but we're not even in an action item. So.
Yeah, but we're contributing greatly to action items.
Sure.
Yes, we are. Okay, let's move into the categoricals.
Mr. Chairman, there's a motion on the floor. You have to deal with it.
Yeah, I'm gonna table it for now until we can actually act on it legally. It'll be under item number 5.
Chair, if you don't mind, I just wanted to mention one more thing before we move to item number 5. The purpose of item number 4, the RTA next development update for all of you today, was just to let you know what the ad hoc working group had been doing, the information that they worked on, the refinement process that they're working on, and then the spreadsheet that they wanted to share. So that's why it's an informational item. And we also wanted to make sure that the CAC knew what was happening, just because they've been meeting so frequently, and they will be meeting again this Wednesday, May 17th, to hopefully try and complete the refinement process. But they wanted to make sure that the CAC was aware of the process while they're in it, in case there were any issues and had any feedback. So that's what the purpose of that was. Information only, as I mentioned. So thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. One of the things I want people to be mindful of and think about as we talk about these elements and sub-elements, and Moss's thoughts as well, is there have been several committee members who have suggested that the amounts which are budgeted within some of the elements, or maybe all the elements are inadequate. And so there are a couple of, and I've, each time that's been suggested, I have said, that is something that we will absolutely respond to as a committee to the board. We will let the board know either that as a committee, we agree with the allocations or we don't. And if we don't, how would we suggest that they be modified, and or should there be additional funding sought through the RTA? So and we're at the point now where we're developing and have really come fairly close, I think, to the percentages within each of the categories, the subcategory percentages. And the reason that we've landed on determining percentages rather than dollars is for that very reason, that we may well want to either shift monies from one bucket to another, or increase all of the buckets, or some combination thereof. And so the percentages, though, allow us to simply apply it to whatever the final amount given may be. As an example of what I'm talking about, the safety projects. Sure. Yeah, the safety projects may be a great spot for funding some of the named projects that are going to have to be cut. Those modernization projects, those are projects which have, in virtually all cases, a safety, a pedestrian, a bicycle, an environmental, or other transit type portions to them. And if that's the case, they may make really good projects, whether they're named or not, to be paid for within that safety element. And so as we're looking at where the money should go, recognize that the city will still have, if everything goes the way that we've been talking about, and no mas, I haven't forgotten, we're still going to be looking side by side at those approaches. But the amount that the city would need to complete those other projects would be somewhere around, let's say, $100 million. And if you recall, our total in the safety is 170. So if that were to be the case, you would suddenly have depleted half or more of your safety funding in order to get all of those named projects completed using these categoricals for the funding of the ones that didn't make it into the 1.1 billion. So keep in mind, as we go through these, if you believe that any of these categories needs more funding or could have less funding and shifted instead to another of the categories, to let the rest of the group know that you're thinking about that. And that will become a part of what our final plan recommendation to the board is. That is the percentages within each of the categories, and our support or suggestions about the categorical allocations. All right, any questions about that? Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just showing an example of what you were referring to, but this is the same slide deck that we showed at the last CAC meeting last month. So I'm not going to go through every single slide again. you all know the amounts that we're looking at and the facts. So what I wanted to focus on are the blue slides are the ones that we had originally showed you. So in this case, the environmental element, it originally had the greenways sub-element, the transportation related wildlife linkages. We talked about options that you all had discussed. So changing it to an active transportation element, an environmental element, and then moving the small business under RTA administrative costs. Talked about the RMAP needs for each of the sub-elements. So that's the greenways, the pedestrian safety improvements. And then this was the green charts are the ones that were the last discussion that you had. This is prior to the proposal that we received. And I wanted to clarify something on Moss's proposal because we didn't receive it in time for the last meeting. We reviewed it and we did a side-by-side for all of you. And in the memo, in your packet, there's a memo dated April 24th from me. And inside that memo is the side-by-side that I did, looking at her initial proposal and the RTA RTA board directed proposal, just so that you'd understand kinds of things we were looking for, pointing out what's eligible and those kinds of things. So that memo was sent out to you in the previous packet, and then we canceled the May 1st meeting, and then it was resent out to you again. So
Yeah, and like I said before, I don't really mind, but I prefer not to spend a bunch of time going through these comments that staff has about the proposal when it's been fairly significantly revised, and I think it'd only be fair, to have this updated as well as Moss's updated things side by side so we could look at them. Edmund?
For clarity, as the RTA board and as the TMC approved these categorical element and sub-element allocations, have they approved them? Are they already working from them?
The sub-element? No.
Or what about even just the elements? They've approved the elements, the
Yeah.
allocations?
Mhm.
yes,
So the TMC and the RTA has. And are they just waiting on us?
A point of clarification, Edmund. So the board a couple of months ago, I think Mayor Honey said that let's just use the RTA ones as a starting point, and those were his verbatim words. I documented that as well, that they worked as these could be as a starting place, the categories and the funding allocations. So just intended to give some direction, but nothing that was, this is what we're doing, this is our directive, and therefore stick with it. So it was a lot of an invitation just to kind of give us a framework to start from, if that's helpful.
So how much has the TMC adjusted these figures so far? Have they gone from them? I guess
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from Carmine on that.
Yeah, as far as I know, they haven't talked yet about the categoricals, but go ahead, Carmine.
So that's correct. So we've seen the information that is in the slide deck that's in front of us today. We've seen that previously. We understood that there were discussions happening within the CAC. We're aware of the proposal put forward by Moss and that this conversation was continuing, but the TMC has not taken action on the other categorical elements.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, Edmund, and to what Carmine said, that is correct. What Moss said, the amounts are a starting point from the board, but those are the amounts that were given to us by the board. So that's
As a starting point.
And it's also the reason, understanding that we've already shifted some money from category to category. As you know, we created a whole new element as well. And so far, we've just been working on the total amount, the $790 million to be allocated among all of those categoricals.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is correct. The total amount has not changed. The shifting between sub-elements has, but not the total amount.
Yeah, hence my desire at least, and I think most of the committee understands this, that going with the percentages within each allows us the flexibility of, and the board, the flexibility certainly of reacting to whatever numbers end up in each of those buckets.
So again, just to recap, for this active transportation element, it had been suggested to leave the greenways sub-element in there, but then also to pull from the safety element, the pedestrian safety improvements and add it in there. So the total of this particular element would be 90 million. And then again, this is just talks about the RMAP needs, which you all received on environmental element, which is the next element that you discussed.
Can we go back?
Oh, yeah,
just a second?
sure.
Is that the first one?
You want to go back to the chart?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, the first one that you started in on the green ones.
Oh.
That's
Yeah,
this
so,
one. Okay, yeah, active transportation is the first one.
Yeah. active transportation.
So as I was mentioning a few minutes ago, I would like everyone to be thinking about that $90 million number and seeing if you believe that that's the right number for this element. If not, what's your suggestion and why? And then we're also looking to see whether that 70-20 split of the 90 represents a good percentage split within this item. Abby?
I'm not sure if this is the right place to bring this up, and if not, let me know and I'll bring it up in the right place.
Okay.
I am deeply uncomfortable with the idea of, first of all, approving numbers when we don't know what it actually applies to, but I'm as uncomfortable with approving percentages of the budget that goes to different things. A budget is a moral document. We had 100 pedestrian deaths in this community last year. And the other thing about a transportation plan is whether or not we're actively trying to do this, it is a cohesive, united plan. Every time you widen a road, you increase your need for pedestrian safety and for wildlife linkages. So we can't view these elements separately. From where I stand as a pedestrian who lives in an urban core, I don't think that we could possibly spend enough money on pedestrian safety, active transportation, public transportation. I know that's not how this is going to shake down, but I also know that when I'm looking at all these projects and seeing all of these roadway expansions prioritized, we're increasing our need for that portion of the budget. So I'm
and it's
to talk about this more holistically. And I did go back through our meeting packet, and you know me, there's statutes in there, so I printed them all out again. And I just don't, I didn't read through all of Moss's stuff. I don't think I've received all of it, but there's a huge priority on everything being multimodal and cohesive. And I think that that addresses our issues in a way that doing separate buckets aren't. And also when we were flashing through the screens, I saw bus pullouts in the safety or transit aspect again. Those are for cars. Those are not for safety or transit. So that's a very specific thing, but generally I'm not comfortable with percentages, and I'm not comfortable with saying, yeah, 90 million looks great when I have no idea what 90 million buys.
well, we have gone through what each of these numbers will buy and what the need is. So we've been doing that, and that's kind of how I think we've landed more or less where we have. That is how staff has interpreted the information that they have and helped us with these numbers. And I'm just telling you, if you feel like those numbers don't reflect what we need, remember also that those named projects have not only created, let's say, alternate mode challenges, they've also addressed them, or they are intended to address them as well. So existing problems may be exacerbated by simply widening a road, but they can also be improved on by the amenities and other elements that are incorporated into that design. And that's certainly the intent. It's what we have demanded as a committee, or have suggested is the only way that it makes sense for the public. And I guess the real question I'm asking is, are we missing the boat with that kind of an approach to say that beyond what we're doing on the named projects, we have these buckets that we want to use for other more or less standalone type programs and projects that might allow us to further improve those elements of transportation that are not in those named project corridors.
Yes, we're missing the boat. I agree in spirit with what Abby is saying. Like, you show me a $90 million figure. The people that came up with these numbers use data. They do this for a living. They're traffic engineers. They either run a municipality, et cetera. And to ask a group of citizens what we feel about this number, you're going to get opinions all day long. We could sit here till midnight talking about the opinions, what we feel about 90 million or our philosophy on this. I mean, at some point we have to lean back on the people that do this for a living and say, create the bucket, tell me what the dollar amounts are, and we'll give you our priorities as citizens. But if we're going to talk about our feelings and how we feel about 90 million, we're going to be here for years.
So Edmund, it's just a reminder, when we were doing the exercise that Tom was providing about, or describing about the needs and versus the funding, staff did present that the active transportation needs were like over 300 million. And that this produced this, even though we've stated this as a high priority. So I think that is where the concern is coming from. And I keep hearing you say that you want to defer to the experts. There are some of us in this room who have multiple degrees in planning.
I got it. You came up with
engineering, and there's engineers and everything. So I just ask that you don't generalize any, anything like that. Thank you.
I'm going to generalize for most of us. And in regards to transit and the number much bigger than what we're looking at here, that's with every category. We don't have enough money. The half cent's not going to do it. If we're going to take care of every need, it's going to take a penny and a half. Like, we keep focusing on the transit part, which I get it. I believe in transit, but we're never going to have enough money with a half cent, and we can't, sacrifice all the other buckets just so we can fill the transit piece.
Isn't that what we're doing with roadways?
What's that?
Isn't that what we're doing with roadways right now?
What do you mean?
All the named projects are roadway projects and majority of them are about increasing vehicular capacity.
Don't talk about in this meeting. What we don't talk about in this meeting is the fact that we have a growing population. We have more cars on the road. Nobody's talking about that. We talk about transit. Everything. There's more cars. There's more traffic. And I think there's some sort of philosophy in this room that if we don't widen the roads, we don't build bigger roadways, which is what we need with the growing number of cars on the road, that people are going to say, oh my gosh, it's so crowded on the road, let me take the bus. It just ain't happening. We're going to get cars, we're going to get more traffic in these communities.
Edmund, it's actually really well studied that
enough of arterial roads in place.
Edmund, it's actually really well studied that increasing the road size just continues to add capacity, and that if you do other strategies such as public transportation, active transportation, if you equitably invest in modes, that it can reduce congestion because people have other options. Why don't people use public transportation? Because there are major service gaps between frequency and actual service connections. And so, it's not a viable option. And so the point is, as our guiding principle, to equitably invest in in transportation systems. And currently we are completely lopsided towards vehicular needs. And that's the case. And so this is about shifting it. And we've done that for the past several decades. We've done that since the boom of the cars. We've been investing in vehicles, and that's why we have sidewalk gaps. That's why we have.
We've been talking for 60
years. And there's
also
an economic development.
Please.
There's also, he just cut me off. Excuse me. Excuse me, Tom.
No.
Tom.
Listen, this is the debate we need to have, but it can't be so one-sided that.
He literally just cut me off, Tom, and you are okay with that.
Make a comment.
I'm trying. I'm trying.
Quick comment. Quick.
You too. Okay. Jeez.
Yeah,
it's gonna have. Please don't have double standards, Tom. About Edmund and me.
Mas, let's go. Give me your point.
If you're caring about economic development, then continuing to invest in cars is not the way. We see all the way, like across the country, people are trying to deconstruct roadways because of the harms that it's done. If we want to solve our housing issue, look at all the real estate that we're spending on, or that's being absorbed by cars, and half the time it's not used except for peak moments. That is such an inefficient use of resources. It is such an inefficient use of our highly valuable land. And also, you want to talk about like the sustainability and viability of our communities into the future. We can't even figure out how to maintain our roads on a regular basis. And it's like crumbling everywhere, all this problem. And we want to just build more. We can't even maintain what we currently have. So what's your solution?
What's your solution? Is your solution Suntran?
My solution is investing in public transit and active transportation and denser land uses, because it's been scientifically proven to improve economic development, because small businesses and businesses can thrive and there's more foot traffic and all of these other things that help business.
Give it to me basic, as a guy that was born and raised here, like a 2-year-old. Is it Suntran?
No, it's the entire public transportation system. It's having
What,
actual
subway?
safe. No, I don't think subway is viable
What is
here.
it?
I think it could be a light.
I'm trying to
I'm
understand
telling
your
you, Edmund.
help. Like, give
Tom,
me
do
the.
you want to
give
moderate
it to
him
me
here?
in-
Yeah, seriously, what is happening right now? Okay, I'm sitting here with my hand up. These, we're going back and forth. Let me just please make my point, which is we haven't had these conversations yet. These are the most important conversations that have always been deferred. So now poor Moss and men are having to get into it and like this, squeeze this conversation in to this meeting where it wasn't even an agenda item. We've been asking to have these conversations because obviously from this little soundbite that we're listening to right now, this is the heart of everything, right? We're talking about induced.
Dogs are pissed.
My dogs are pissed. We're talking about the climate crisis. We're talking about pedestrian deaths in our community. We're a leader in pedestrian deaths across the United States. And we haven't talked about how our budget is reflecting our concern and our values in this context. Instead, I have to yell about it over my dogs because I want to have this conversation. I want to have it in depth. I want to have time set aside. No, we're not. I want to have time set aside on the agenda for us to talk about these issues.
We're having it right now.
We're not really having it right now. It wasn't on the agenda. We're forcing the issue, right? We want to be able to have some time that's been set aside for us to do a deep dive and to hear from experts about what the heck is going on in terms of induced demand, what this project list looks like in terms of the climate crisis, right? Carbon emissions, and what this project looks like in terms of what it means for pedestrian deaths in our community, which is currently having a crisis, of safety on our streets. We're not having those in-depth conversations. We've asked about them. Now we're forced to have them in a 5-minute shouting match, and it doesn't work for me. And I'm not going to be able to get behind this plan until we do a deep dive where we're really talking about these issues instead of always deferring the conversation to later and being asked to vote on things before we've even had the heart of the matter type conversations.
So it's the why. I'm with Eva. Is it Eva or Eva? Eva?
Eva, thank you.
I'm with Eva. So what we've asked for numerous times is the why. Tell me why the bucket's this size. Tell me why we're investing in roadways more so than transit. And you can, again, go to personal feelings and opinions. Yes, I know, Moss, you're a pro at it. I'm not. I'm an insurance agent. I love economic development. I'm born and raised here, but I'm not a traffic expert. So some traffic expert needs to come in here and tell me why the buckets are as such and why the funding is as such.
Because the suburbs have submitted expensive projects. That's why, Edmund.
Oh, Tom's talking. Hold on.
Yeah, what do business groups or companies that look to locate here from an economic standpoint look for, and how do they react to our transportation system the way it is? I would presume that they like to see
Probably not dead people.
transit for their employees, They also like to see roads that aren't.
I would presume that we wouldn't be dead because we already burned up in a freaking living hell that we created through, carbon emissions and concrete and asphalt.
Wait, just a second,
Okay.
I asked a question. Let's see if we can.
So
Take
from
these
the
one at a
Sun
time.
Corridor SALC perspective, when site selectors come to the city of Tucson, they have two issues. Number one is we actually kind of agree. Roads, they do talk about our roads. They say they're in bad condition. They talk about us not having enough spec space from the industrial needs as a company moves here to town. They don't want to have to wait to build an industrial property. They want it built already. And then they say that we have a Google problem and we beat the crap out of ourselves over education. Those are our three issues, but they talk about our roads. I mean, the last site selector group that came in said, your roads are horrible. And
Actually, it's really great that you brought this up because I was looking at the EVAC advisory board and they actually named in their smart cities task force that the modernization of our transportation system was a key issue. And they acknowledged that the massive, the pedestrian deaths was a big challenge and that there was an issue with our transportation. So that's a PAG smart communities task force that wrote this in 2018. And they commissioned a report by Magellan, I'm assuming some consulting firm, who suggested that they we do broadband expansion throughout the network, and that's where they cited the RTA as an opportunity. And in my proposal or the framework that I put forward, I'm advocating that would be a sub element of putting fiber as a backbone of fiber network along our major highways and major roads within the region. I also listed in there as implement adaptive signal control and prioritization of technology along key corridors, which is another big gap issue that they put up there that would adjust congestion issues. It would also help to improve smoother traffic flow. So yeah, there's a lot of research that's already been done and that PAG has produced itself. And the proposal I've been trying to present for a long time, and the conversation I wish we had had 6 months ago, Tom.
Hey, well, we did.
Could have been having this instead of continuing to look at the same slides.
Dale?
Yeah, I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. When we talk about the modernization projects, as been explained earlier in this meeting, those modernization projects are roadways that are old roadways or roadways that haven't been adequately developed in the past. Many cases. Those modernization projects are going to include, beyond what we're seeing in this number, and I'll have a comment on the number in a minute, but all those roadways will include the sidewalks that are necessary. Theoretically, they'll include pedestrian signals that are necessary. They will include the bike paths that are not there. And as we found, and you mentioned the Broadway, Euclid to Aviation widening project, Euclid to Country Club. And, when we look at that, we had a number of $25 to $30 million that would have been the cost of adding those sidewalks and those bikeways. And
pull throughs too.
And yeah, and I recognize and I agree with Abby, and I've been transit. I understand the transportation planning for wanting those bus pullouts, but I also understand the effects from the drivers and the standpoint of not wanting those. And I know what Abby's saying about that. Yes, it's about the cars primarily. It's not to say we shouldn't build any of them.
No, I'd say it's about the bus drivers. That's all it's about.
Yeah. And so that, I mean,
else.
there are pros and cons there. That's all I'm going to say. But so what we're talking about here is what we're going to spend on roadways that are not going to be widened, that are not going to be rebuilt or modernized. Those projects will have these same pedestrian projects, et cetera, built into them. And they are supposed to, and yes, we need to kick the engineers in the butt if they don't put them in. when they design those projects. But as a practical matter, this number is where we can do to retrofit other roadways. And I totally agree with probably with Moss and Abby, et cetera, that this number is grossly inadequate. Because we've had studies over the last 20 years about the number of roadways that don't have sidewalks. And even if we get all of these modernization projects City of Tucson's talking about, there'll be a whole lot of other streets that still need modernization projects and don't have the adequate pedestrian, et cetera, facilities. So I think we got to keep in mind that that is out there and that's a part of those projects. On the other hand, and I want to say this, if you look at this list, there's a dichotomy here. There is only one project that is an enhancement project that exists outside of that is in the City of Tucson. And there is clearly one need historically for these type of improvements inside the City of Tucson because they were not built at the time that the roadways were built. But when we look at outside and we start talking about adding transportation lanes, we are talking about areas that are new. And we can have a great long discussion about we shouldn't be building houses at the Rocking K and we shouldn't be doing these kind of things. And as a water operator who ran a small water utility, I understand a lot of those issues. But somewhere we still have to come back and deal with the fact that we are a regional transportation agency. And our job is not just to look at the close-in metropolitan area. We are to look at the extended area and what's needed. The county have committed to certain zoning rules, and there's certain things that are going to have to be dealt with. And looking at Camino Loma Alta and saying that Camino Loma Alta, as it exists today, is going to be an adequate roadway for the number of houses that the county, Pima County has committed to that can be built on that roadway will never function. It will cease, and it's going to have to be dealt with at some point. So we need to find a balance. And yes, I'd like to see a bigger number here. I'm going to say I'll live with the $70 million number, but I want a statement, just as you have talked about, that we need to say this isn't adequate, but I'll be very honest, this project, I think the projects that we have here as listed projects is kind of the minimum. And I do not believe that this list we have is actually adequate. I think that's a shortfall. But there is also huge shortfall on sidewalks and bikeways and those kind of areas too. So we need, and I think it's been said by several people here, we need money across the board. We need more money across the board.
Yeah, just to remind you,
I can live with this number.
The named projects which were submitted by the jurisdictions, there were 108 of them. Based on what the working group has whittled this down to, that's a quarter of those. And those were initially reduced to begin with by putting a maximum limit that each jurisdiction was allowed to even submit, knowing that we didn't have unlimited funds. So it's a huge need, and we know that this is essentially a drop in the bucket. I have Jamie and then Bruce and then Carolyn. Still there, Jamie?
Hey, this is Jamie. So I'll forego mine. I think Dale pretty much said everything I was saying, that we got to make tough choices. And we can't say it's car versus bicycle versus pedestrian. We have to be considerate of all those folks that are going to be using the streets. And it's not either or, it's this and we're not going to get everything we want, but what can we do to move the needle forward? And I think that's what we need to continue to do. That's all.
Thank you. Bruce?
Yeah, just two comments. A lot's been said here, so I'd just like to first address the issue about economic development. spent my professional life doing that. I've talked to over 500-600 companies that we tried to attract to the UA Tech Park. And I can tell you that their primary concern is they want high quality housing connected by safe roadways and transit systems to get their people back and forth to work. And that's a huge priority for them. And I think we need to address that issue as we go forward. But I wanted to go back to Abby's comment about pedestrian safety stuff. So I had asked the question earlier, Rick, about whether the named projects included all those safety elements and different kinds of things. And my understanding is they do. So this is money that can be used to enhance or to go to other places to deal with safety. I guess I don't know, because to Edmund's point, I'm not a traffic engineer. I don't know all the details, but could we direct the question back to the TMC and especially to the city of Tucson as they consider that $75 million in modernization plans? Could a higher priority for those dollars be directed towards pedestrian safety, given the acute nature and we're seeing it in this community right now? So
I won't predict their response, but
it just seems like to me that
Interesting
if
question.
the majority of pedestrian accidents are happening within the city of Tucson, that might be a good use of that $75 million as a part of the modernization process.
Okay, thanks. Carolyn and then Patricia.
Can you add me to the energy?
Okay. And then Edmund and Abby.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I'm a little under the weather, but I'll give it a whirl. And I agree with Dale. I agree with Eva. But I did want to clarify for Edmund, because I was on the last CAC and so were you and others here too, is that these numbers in 2006 were not developed by engineers and road people, which I guess they're the same people, but these numbers, except for maybe transit and roadways, that was based on needs, and we had a lot of meetings about this. But these numbers, the percentages and the overall numbers were developed by us, the same committee, that's a citizen committee. And then the numbers that have come to us for this one came from the board, who said, let's use the same numbers again. So there was no like mathematician engineering feat to all this. What we did, Edmund, if you remember, was we were trying to come up with something that we thought the voters could support. And I think that's what we should continue to look at. And we haven't gotten to that public process or the public outreach where we get input from people. But what the board specifically did as a starting point was say that we want the same percentages as 2006, which may or may not be the right way to go, but that's what we've done. And that's what the board said, and the staff has interpreted that to take the deferred projects basically off of the top, which means out of the categorical elements, because the roads are still the same. And I think we could easily get to those numbers as a starting point if we had the deferred projects come out of that $1.1 billion or whatever it is for the roadway projects, because we got to pay the piper. And then the numbers that we're looking at from the categoricals are not the ones on the ballot. And I've said this before, they all got swept in 2009 or 2010 to pay for roads, which still have deferred projects. So in a sense, there's deferred category buckets that we still have to move ahead. But I'm not making that point, but I had put together a chart before, which from $2.1 billion in 2006 to the RTA next in 24 was 2.3 billion. So I went through that exercise of math, and for the the pedestrian safety improvements, which were called elderly and safety improvements before, and the greenways, pathways, bikeways, and sidewalks, that would come out under the old, if we added in the deferred projects, and I'm not sure what to do about this new contingency and whatever the other number is, put that off for the side. But the greenways, pathways, bikeways and sidewalks for 69 and, or would be 69, and the pedestrian would be 23. So it actually comes out about the same as the 90 million. It comes up to what's now called active transportation for 94. But many of the categories such as transit are pretty different. And so that would be, I'm not going to make a motion right now, but that would be an approach I would take based on Tom's suggestion that we come up with different numbers. All we do is have the deferred projects come out of the roadway budget because that's what they are.
So Carolyn,
then-
you would then take the 230 million and spread it out over the other categoricals. Is that your suggestion?
Well, it would be the total of what we were dealing with before, which I can't remember exactly what it was. If it was 1.3, it would be 0.9.
Yeah, 230 million.
Yeah, and that would definitely be my suggestion. I don't know if that is where we end up, but we're trying to move this forward. And I also don't think, we haven't really talked about Moss's revised proposal yet, but I don't think that that's inconsistent if we decide, excuse me, to go with, named projects and unnamed projects down the whole board. And so that's what I think we should, and I've got the numbers right here because I did the math a couple of months ago, and we've moved some categories around, so we'd have to kind of unhook those because it was before we renamed categories. But that's where I would suggest that we start, because like Dale said, and like the TMC said, and like we have said, and like the RTA board said, there's not enough money for all the needs. So this is why we're having these animated discussions now, because we have to make some recommendations to the board. And I think we also have to, to what I was saying at the beginning of my comments, was I think we have to keep in mind what eventually the voters are going to say yes to. And if they see less money that was on the ballot, that it was in 2006, I think we have to think about that. Anyway, that's all. I'm throwing it out there for now to think about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Patricia.
Thanks. Those were some great points, Carolyn. So thank you for that. I just wanted to express that I'm looking forward to being able to review the alternative framework that I believe Moss is proposing, with named projects in each of the categories. Partly because, and I think I've said this before, but I've not heard any assurance that these categorical elements without named projects won't be swept to pay for roadway projects as they were in the last plan. So that's a concern. And I also think that naming projects under these categoricals, which also align with the guiding principles we already voted on, assures that we can go through this process of budgeting and get an idea of what exactly these arbitrary numbers might actually buy us. So I just wanted to say that.
Okay, great, thanks. Let's see, Edmund, I'm sorry, and then Abby, and then Moss.
So a bit in response to Carolyn, that original RTA CAC that we were on, we had Rick Myers and Katie Dusenberry, and they made it very clear to us that we are decades behind where we should be in regards to our arterial roads. We as a group, as you remember, we were very pragmatic. I find this group to be much more, who was the previous word somebody just used?
Idealist?
No, this group's much animated. That's a great way to put it. This group is so much more animated than the previous group. And we didn't have the previous CAC. No one was vying for a certain category. We just knew we were all so far behind. We had to do the best we could in every category. That's how we came up with these group of elements to help sell this to the voters. We haven't even got to the selling of the voters part. I'll throw out one suggestion, because it sounds like at some point we're gonna have to compare Moss's plan versus, I guess, the RTA and TMC's plan. So it's one of our members versus all these people on these two committees. And great, let's do it. One suggestion I might throw in there, if we wanted to keep this simple, is we could keep with the same elements that they're proposing here and the sub elements they're proposing here. Last time, I think it was Farhad who was here, we were talking about how we're taking the conservative income of the half-cent sales tax increase. And that those are the dollars that we're working from very conservatively. We could always take that conservative approach and not have a contingency, since we're taking the conservative approach, or maybe take 80 million of the 100 million that's provided here. And we can find the areas in which we have these named elements and sub-elements. We could find the areas in which we're most passionate about in this group, and we could spread that 80 million through those categories. Say we choose pedestrian safety improvements, and we say we have $80 million. We're going to take the 20 million and now make it 40. That could be our suggestion, which might make this a much easier process.
Thank you, Edmund.
Abby.
So I'm going to try to keep this concise and not be too repetitive, but I enjoyed listening to the back and forth we just had. And I appreciated Ava's comment about how serious this was. And I think she said something about everything burning. I think Jamie's raised this a bunch, and I appreciate the conciliatory intent behind we all get something, but we can't all get something. When we widen a road, but put in a pedestrian crossing, we didn't really just give anything to the pedestrians. You try walking across one of those roads in 115-degree heat with traffic going that speed. We can't do it. We're like a person budgeting our like gym allocation and fitness allocation while also budgeting lots of Five Guys cheeseburgers, fries, and milkshakes. Like, these are competing goals. And I think we have to recognize that they're competing goals. And I think that we have to be open to not just what the staff experts tell us. And I do not question that these guys are experts. I also don't question that Moss is an expert or that Edmund is an expert in his area of business. But I've been suggesting for over a year that we be allowed to share information about things like induced demand. Every time the bus pullouts come up, I want us to actually look at evidence that bus pullouts are not for pedestrian safety. They're not for transit. They're for congestion. We need to have these conversations, and we're not, even if we increase the sales tax, we can't put more money into all of these funds and achieve all of these goals. Dale, appreciate what you said about maybe we shouldn't be building in farther out areas. We shouldn't be. I know this is just the transportation committee. Transportation is really, 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 really important. This is field of dreams level stuff, but more important, if we build it, they will come. It does matter how we build things. And we are experts because we're the Citizens Advisory Committee. We're experts in our own areas. We're experts in our own communities. We rely on the traffic engineers' expertise for this stuff, but we should be thinking big. Roadways isn't big. It's real tired. And I think that, you know, if we sound animated, I think that it's because we're not here for wonky transportation issues. We are here for what this entire region looks like in 20 years. And it's not just about roads, it's about the whole region and what it looks like where houses are, what it looks like where it's safe to cross the street, what our climate looks like. And I think we should be thinking about things that way. So just gonna put that out there again.
Just a quick question. I don't disagree with anything you said, actually. But I have a point of departure when I think about the electeds that have developed this community the way that it is. We can't blame business or anything else except on ourselves. This is the way that we as a Western community have chosen, how the voters have chosen to be represented and therefore to develop their community. And it has created, go back to 2006, as Carolyn talked about, the overriding majority of citizens stated that congestion was their biggest issue. Not quite as big now, And so I would think that we would probably not have quite as much emphasis on that. And from what I can see, we don't. But the point remains that our electeds, and by reflection, we have created what we live in. And people keep coming here, so there's something about it that we like. And so to say that we can have an impact as a committee, you know, trying to provide for the current needs, the next 20 year of needs in our transportation system, not in anything else, but our transportation system. We have to, at some point, I think, focus our attention on that part of it, and the rest of our attention, the rest of our lives outside of this room on the other stuff that you've talked about. How do we develop our community in the future? How do we go from an average of 1 house per acre over our whole community to 15 or 20 per acre in any kind of an eon? You know, and how does that happen? It's not going to happen in this room. Go ahead.
If I may, I mean, so I'm looking at ARS 485309 right now, which is the Regional Transportation Plan definition. And we're not doing this the way that even the statute says. Again, this is the one that starts out with shall include a public transportation component, may include other things. I think that we have the flexibility to be more creative. And I'm going to push back that what the community focused on is congestion. When MAG did a similar study to the one that we did here in 2018, they asked different questions than we asked. And when you ask different questions, you get different answers. And so one of the questions that Maricopa asked its residents was about commuting time. So it turns out that people don't actually care about congestion. They just want to spend more time with their families, with their hobbies, at home, in their garden, whatever. Congestion's not really the issue. Time in traffic is the issue. And so I think if we broaden our questions, I am not suggesting that we push anything on the public. I also think that the public tends to be not in lockstep with elected officials. So I think that if we think more broadly, we have more information than we had in 2006. We're in a more acute crisis than we were in 2006. We need to think differently within our legal framework and within our mission. And I think that we could do really, really neat stuff here. So I hope we will.
Such as
refocusing our priorities and, you know, dealing with things like time in transit as opposed to congestion and what that
that actually is the measure that we've used for congestion is time, travel time.
But you're talking about cars and not talking about public transportation.
So same thing I asked Moss, like explain it to me like I'm a 2-year-old. Is it Suntran? Is it a subway? What is it?
So, I mean, I don't think I should be the one giving this presentation, but generally buses are what every little like development consulting brainstorming group comes back to when given a problem of how to quickly and safely move things. A bus is more flexible than Suntran, right? And we see Suntran here.
You mean, you're talking about the light rail.
So the bus, sorry, I'm confusing the bus and the light rail.
Yeah.
So yeah, it could be buses. I mean, it could be actually utilizable pedestrian and bike infrastructure. I think that the images that PAG has chosen to highlight multimodal transportation on the website are actually a pretty good what not to do. So super crowded intersections with buses and bikes and people and they're too wide.
So I apologize for asking another question, but so break it down for me. So all this talk of transit, all these meetings that we've come to, and it's transit. In Moss's, we're moving the money down from like 1.2 billion down to like 600 million or whatever the numbers are. We're cutting in half basically. So that's for, as we're spending more money in transit, that's buses, bike lanes, sidewalks. Even though our population is growing, we're going to say, Bus, I'm not being smartass. I just want to understand.
Right.
So buses, you tell me, tell me pragmatically, you have the checkbook, what are we building?
I'm gonna answer your question with this question, Edmund.
Do it.
And I'm gonna kick that one, I think, back to Tom. So I mean, transportation is a component. We are also talking about density and
Sure.
having businesses be near where people live and
Sure.
having recreation be near where people live, so there's less time on the road. So
Sure.
this is just one of the components. But we do need to, there's a carrot and a stick element with public transportation, right? You
but
don't
paint
want
it
to
to
push
me.
people onto the bus because driving is just absolutely appalling. But if you make driving easier and easier and easier, you keep people off of buses.
So you have a checkbook, what are we designing? What are we're gonna have more buses, more sidewalks, more bus lanes? What are we designing?
So we are designing multimodal regional.
What does that mean?
corridors.
2-year-old?
I don't know, man. There's no definition in the.
Abby, do you want to phone a friend?
We're fighting for this thing every day, transit. Please, Moss, 2-year-old.
Okay, so study that was done in 2019 of projecting to 2045 found that traffic volumes in Tucson have been decreasing even with growing population. It's been up since population has been growing 6.6% since 2005, and the number of jobs have been growing by 4.2% since 2005. However, traffic volumes have been decreasing. And other data points for you, Edmund, just in case it's helpful, and also Tom, just to kind of reorient everyone to what the voting population or the largest voting population in the region supports. It's 58% say that they want a balanced transportation system with better, 42% want better crosstown mobility, 37% want transportation support options that support a sustainable city and improve safety for all modes. Specifically, when thinking about specific investment priorities about safety and maintenance, the greatest support was for improving safety of roadway crossings for people walking and biking. 68% of respondents said that. Improving safety for all roadway users, repaving streets, building safer, more connected bikeways. Over 50% people said that. Building more sidewalks that are fully accessible to those with wheelchairs. 61% said that. Improving traffic signal timing and coordination. So this is a recent study that is.
Excuse me, just tell us again where that study comes from.
This is Move Tucson.
What population was it?
This is from Move Tucson, which was completed just about a year or two ago and focused on the city of Tucson region, but I don't think it was constrained to people, citizens of the city. It was a general study that was completed. And that future scenario study was focused on the Tucson streets, which is also the largest network of streets within our region. So based on that, we actually don't have a grow out problem in our fundamental core of our community and the regional hub. Where we have congestion issues, as I think Dale pointed out, is in the fringe areas where there is more flexible land use, which I will point out that land use and transportation is kind of a chicken and the egg. What comes first? Who drives what? And I think that we can make very deliberate decisions about funding. The RTA doesn't have to be the vehicle for suburban sprawl. It can be the focus of true regional investment, and rather than saying, how do we build something out in Dove Mountain, right? That's only going to serve a very, very small portion of Marana, for example, or whatever.
Okay, thanks.
And I have some other comments that I've been sitting on, Tom. So please, I know I've been waiting patiently in line, Tom. So I would like to say the rest of my statements.
All right, go for it.
I just want to also point out that we shouldn't be referencing RTA 1 as a good basis for anything, since it's over 20 years old and our community has radically changed. And so if we want to have a modern region, we need to have a modern plan that's based on modern practices. And that's why this copy and paste framework of RTA 1 is just totally unproductive in my perspective. Jamie, I just want to say thank you so much for your statements. I thought you were spot on about needing to balance everything. And the finer point I want to put on it is that unfortunately we have traditionally focused on vehicles, and our spending shows that when you spend nearly 60% of your budget on vehicles, that has been the priority. And that means, and then as Carolyn very eloquently laid out, when money has then from other categories and other modes been swept to further fill the funding gap for vehicles, that means less and less has been going to these other modes of transportation. And therefore it has been an inequitable investment. And that is what we're trying to fix and right size right now. And that is why I have this other proposal that I would love to screen share. I would love to fiddle with numbers. And I have, like, we have live Google Sheets, and we could just sit there and change the percentages, change names of things and figure it out. And I'm happy to do that and facilitate that process. And I don't see this as idealistic, Tom. I really see this as just being the right thing to do that's actually in alignment with what our demands of our community now, and not based on 20 years of bad data that really focused on regional, on vehicle needs and data points.
Good point.
And so
That's on my part to as far as the word he was looking for. I would like to hear from a couple more people. We'll run out of time fairly soon.
if I might finish,
I'll
just
make sure that we will get to your presentation at our next meeting.
I'm not trying to present today. I'm just trying to finish the thought. And so what I was going to say, and this is why, going back to my comments earlier when we were talking about those various motions that were tabled, is why I think it's so important that we ask jurisdictions to think about what other named projects are for other categories, because what would it look like if we were to, as a region, knowing that there are regional commuters and people who get around our communities on bicycles and by foot or rolling around, then like knowing that those folks exist in our communities, how do we fill the infrastructure gaps from them? If they live in Oro Valley, how do they get downtown to work? And how do we fill those gaps and ensure that those needs are met? What would it take? What would it cost? What would be a named project that we could do and have and funded through this that would serve those needs? Because all I've ever heard is that, also a lifelong Tucson and Edmond, all I've ever heard is that we do not have enough bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. So yes, that means having adequate sidewalks that are ADA compliant. That means having protected bicycle lanes. That means having more routes for SunTrans, SunLink, all of these increased service frequency. You go to San Francisco, you wait 5-8 minutes for a bus, and it takes you like 4 different places. You go to pretty much any other large city with a functional public transportation system, and you don't wait 15 minutes and it ends up taking, in Tucson, you could walk to your destination on SunLink faster sometimes than waiting for it to come. And that needs to change. And this is what we need to address with this funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Ava, and then Chris, and then I want to talk to you all about our next meeting as well.
Thank you. Listen, I wanted to say too, I don't see my take on this as idealism. I see it as a realistic love of Tucson.
I know, I apologize for using the word. I was just trying to help him fill in the thought wrongly.
It's a Freudian
and I'm
slip.
embarrassed. Sorry.
But I love Tucson so much, and I don't want to see us turn into a Phoenix. I don't want to see us turn into an LA. I've seen so many awesome communities that got destroyed because the roadway stuff was out of control, left unchecked, And if I may just close by quoting Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I do not see myself as part of a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens. I talk to a lot of people from a lot of different places in Tucson with a lot of different backgrounds. And I am just representing them on this committee. I'm not just representing my own special interests. I'm not just representing business. I'm representing the residents of this area. And I want to say too, hey, I am totally on board. I really understand that what's right for, an intersection in the middle of Tucson is not going to be what's right and what's required for, a semi-rural road, or something that's farther out. Like, I understand there are different needs, there are different requirements. I'm not going to measure everything with the same yardstick. But that's why I think we really need to have conversations about the projects, look real specific, and really have these moments where we get into the weeds about our values and about what we want to see come out of these investments, because they're investments that are supposed to last not just 20 years. These projects will be impacting us for generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Edmund, for the two-year-old, this is my attempt at the two-year-old explanation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All of the conversation that we've heard today is everything can be distilled around this, in my mind. Is the balance of our investment that we take to the voters, we're going to have to explain the why. Is the balance of the investment directed at encouraging people to get out of their drive by yourself cars, or we encourage people and put into place real infrastructure that absolutely encourages and facilitates people to take other modes of transportation to work and play? That's it. What is the balance of our investment in these dollars that the community will invest? Either we invest in facilitating people being able to sit in their car by themselves and drive, versus other modes of transportation. And if the weight is on cars, that will only continue what we have created for ourselves. If the weight is shifted to encouraging, I'm not talking about discouraging, I'm talking about encouraging really invest in other modes of transportation. That's what we want to see in 20 years. If we as a community decide we want to see that in 20 years as the outcome of all of this, then that is the distinction that we're confronted with right now.
Right. Thank you, Chris. Let's talk about how we try to get to the finish line of the work that the board has asked us to do here. We have 2 meetings remaining on our schedule. I'm not sure if we're going to have to fill in between each one of those with the meeting a week, but I would like to make a suggestion to at least get 3 meetings between now and July 1st. And those would each be 2 weeks apart, and they would start 2 weeks from today. The day after Memorial Day, I recognize people will be traveling. I would suggest if we do that we make that meeting a 3 o'clock meeting, just so that people can try to get caught up at least on their email in the morning before diving into this. And then each 2 weeks after that, which would be the 12th of June and the 26th of June. If miraculously we didn't need the last one in June, then we could cancel that. I think it's perhaps more likely that we would have to fill in another week in there. So I'd like a little bit of feedback from folks about the proposal to go every 2 weeks starting today. 2 weeks and 1 day would be our next meeting, and then 2 weeks less 1 day for the next, and 2 weeks exactly for the third.
So just to say the dates, you're looking the 29th at
No,
3
I'm sorry, the 30th at 3 p.m.
on a Tuesday. Okay, I see.
Tuesday. And then Monday, the 12th of June at 11, and Monday, the 26th at 3. Bruce?
No, you answered my question, because I think normally we would have met on the 5th, which is the first Monday.
Right, we would
Do
normally
need to
have
also
done-
include that date to get through our work.
I'd like you to block off all the dates or all the Mondays if we have to do those. Yeah.
Another option is we just ask the board for more time. We know that we have flexibility in the schedule, and I think it's the right thing to do to make sure, since we have so many open questions, to make sure that we're doing things the right way, and rather than trying to jam through a bunch of meetings when we're all working professionals, or many of us are, and it's just a lot of time crammed into the summer when I'm sure folks are also planning to travel. We should have been having conversations a long time ago.
Other comments?
Right. My comment is I think we need to go to the 3 days and see if we can get it done. I think we need to work on our deadline. I think the deadline may have to be extended, but I think we need to try to get there.
I agree with Dale.
Yeah, it's a possibility too. All right.
Tom, that's
Anyone
Carolyn.
else? Carolyn, yes.
Yeah, I just had I don't know if it's a question or suggestion. I'm not sure if Carmine and Terry are still on, but I think we really need to get the flavor of the conversation and the various, I don't think we're that far away from our overall opinions, but we still have to get there. I would like to make sure that it's relayed to the TMC through the joint working group or whatever to talk, to let them know what, because we need their help, and we need to let them know where this conversation is going.
Yeah.
So I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, hopefully you'll be back
Yes.
ground by Wednesday for the meeting with the joint group, but if not, we understand.
Yeah, I hope so.
Everyone, please block off the 30th of May at 3 p.m. and the 12th and 26th of June. The 12th being at 11 a.m. and the 26th being at 3 p.m. And with that, we'll adjourn this meeting.